Connectism emphasizes the connection perspective. I would like to review the term connectism that was previously introduced. Connectism provides a refreshing connection perspective with respect to conscious experience. The intermind, IM, is the central connecting component within connectism. The physical mind, PM, is connected to the intermind, and the intermind is connected to the conscious mind, CM. So connectism is actually a triple mind perspective. Connectism fully conforms to the intermind model, IMM. The physicalist perspective is that consciousness is somehow located in the neurons or is an emergent property of neural activity. This was a reasonable assumption, given that conscious activity is correlated with neural activity. But science has no theory, hypothesis, or even a speculation about how consciousness could be in the neurons or an emergent property. Science has not been able to show, for example, how something like the experience of redness is some kind of effect of neural activity. In fact, the more you think about the redness experience and then think about neural activity, the less likely it seems that the redness experience is actually some sort of neural activity. Science has tried in vain for 100 years to figure this out. If the experience of redness actually was in the neurons, science would have had a lot to say about it by now. Something has got to be wrong with the physicalist perspective on the problem. Science needs to adopt the new 21st century connectist perspective and put aside the outdated last century physicalist perspective. The intermind model can accommodate consciousness as being in the neurons or an emergent property, but it can also accommodate other concepts of consciousness. The intermind model is structurally a connection model. These connections might be conceptual where all three minds are actually in the neurons or an emergent property. But these connections might have more reality to them where the physical mind, the intermind, and the conscious mind are separate things. I will speculate that the situation is more like the latter than the former. In that case, the physical mind, which is in physical space, PSP, uses the intermind to create a connection to the conscious mind, which is in conscious space, CSP. The important perspective change here is that the physical mind is connected to the conscious mind, rather than assuming that the physical mind contains the conscious mind as part of the physical mind. This allows the conscious mind to be a thing in itself existing in its own conscious space. This is called connectism. Remember that the greatest minds in science have tried to show that consciousness is in the neurons, but they have come up with zero explanations for how it could happen. It could be said that the greatest minds of science have concluded that it is inconceivable how consciousness actually is in the neurons, or as a result of neural activity, or is emergent from the neurons. The obvious realization is to conclude that consciousness is not in the neurons. It can be speculated that consciousness is connected to the neurons. With connectism, it is not necessary, at first, to understand consciousness itself, but only to understand the connection mechanism. With physicalism, the whole concept of consciousness must be understood and explained as being somehow in the neurons. There is no easier connection mechanism to understand with physicalism. The inability of science to solve the problem of consciousness is the main driver for looking at other perspectives. The physicalist insistence that consciousness is in the neurons or is just some artifact of neural activity is getting us nowhere. Not only is science unable to explain consciousness as neural activity, it is also unable to provide the first clue as to what something like the experience of redness actually is. Things like redness, the standard atone, and the salty taste are conscious experiences. These kinds of conscious experiences are some sort of phenomena that exist in the reality of the manifest universe, but they are in a category of phenomena that science cannot yet explain. It is therefore sensible and logical to speculate a place for them to exist. This, of course, is conscious space. Science is also unable to explain a thing like desire-driven volition. Desire is a conscious experience that can usually be satisfied by an action in physical space that achieves the desire. This is almost always accomplished by movements of the muscles in physical space. It is completely sensible and logical that we place the desire in the conscious mind, which is in conscious space, and speculate that the conscious mind can affect the physical mind to produce the muscle movements that satisfy the conscious desire. We will further specify that the conscious mind works through the intermind to generate these signals in the physical mind that control the muscles. So, there are conscious experience signals that go from the physical mind to the conscious mind through the intermind. And there are also conscious desire-driven movement signals that go from the conscious mind through the intermind to the physical mind in the opposite direction. The machine consciousness experiments propose various configurations of electronics that might be sensitive to desire-driven volition from a conscious mind in conscious space. Separating the conscious mind from the physical mind allows a whole new perspective for understanding various operational aspects of consciousness. Some previous experimental deductions and conclusions about consciousness, using the physicalist perspective, may have to be overturned when using this new perspective. For example, this separation provides a new way of understanding the effect of anesthesia. With the old perspective, the reasoning was like this. The neural activity was halted and consciousness seemed to also be halted, so therefore consciousness must be in the neurons. With the new perspective, the reasoning would be, the neural activity was halted and consciousness seemed to be halted, so therefore the connection must have been interrupted. With this new perspective, consciousness itself was not halted, but rather the connection from the physical mind to the conscious mind was interrupted. We don't know what the conscious mind does during an interruption. But since anesthesia can halt memory operations, the physical mind will not have been able to save any memories of the interruption that could be accessed by the conscious mind after the connection is reestablished. The old physicalist assumptions about how physical mind injuries affect consciousness will have new interpretations using the connection perspective. After a physical mind injury, the connections between the physical mind and the conscious mind can be disrupted. Memories may be difficult to retrieve, volitional control of the body may become erratic, and the personality might even be changed. But these are physical mind degradations and not conscious mind degradations. The conscious mind will not be affected because the conscious mind is connected through the intermind to the physical mind. The intermind protects and buffers the conscious mind from physical mind damages. The conscious mind will effectively be connected to something different after a physical mind injury. The conscious mind will try to do the best it can with whatever physical mind it is connected to, regardless of the physical mind degenerations that exist. Split brain experiments are perceptual tests performed on patients whose corpus callosums have been cut, usually to relieve the occurrence of epileptic seizures. The corpus callosum connects the two sides of the brain together. The modern accepted results from split brain experiments have revealed that, although there are two separate perceptual streams each processed by different sides of the brain, the patient still feels like one integrated person. There are not two separate consciousnesses. These patients feel normal, although they do have some perceptual and cognitive degradations. They can operate in society without other people noticing anything different. They can even drive cars. The big question in more recent times is how could they feel like single persons and how can they operate in society as well as they do? Connectism answers this question. It is because an intermind has developed that connects to both sides of the brain. The intermind has not been cut, but only the physical brain has been altered. The intermind is probably where the integration of the person happens. This separation of conscious mind from physical mind also presents a new perspective for thinking about the subconscious mind versus the conscious mind. It is logical to speculate that the subconscious mind is completely implemented in the physical mind. Many of the actions we do every day are controlled by subconscious brain programs that run in the background, out of view of our conscious awareness. The intermind needs to make the processing decisions for which of the activities in the physical mind should be translated into conscious experiences. The intermind implements the binding processing necessary to create a usable conscious experience of the external world for the conscious mind to operate in. It would be very confusing and inefficient if the intermind had to translate all neural activity, including the background brain programs, into conscious experiences. There has always been an intuition that there was a separate conscious mind and subconscious mind. It is now easy to see how this physical mind to conscious mind separation logically and naturally predicts a subconscious mind concept separate from the conscious mind. Amazingly, we have to conclude that the whole physical mind, brain, is the subconscious mind. There is no part of the physical mind that is conscious, but rather, the physical mind connects to the consciousness of a conscious mind. I believe that Connectism is the only theory of consciousness that can predict the subconscious mind. There are much faster things and slower things than our consciousness. The conscious mind experience of the world is as fast as the physical mind will allow. We cannot perceive a speeding bullet because it is faster than the physical mind can operate. Some people will argue that this means consciousness is a physical mind-limited phenomenon and proves that consciousness is the physical mind and nothing more. But this physicalist assumption is naive. This does not mean the conscious mind itself is limited, but just that when the conscious mind is correlating with a physical mind, it is limited to what the physical mind can do. Remember that the connectist view considers the physical mind as just a tool that the conscious mind uses. The conscious mind might be capable of much more, and since I am suggesting that the conscious mind is not even in physical space, but in conscious space, we don't know what the limits really are. We may be very surprised by our limitations someday after we shed our sluggish human brains and transfer our conscious minds to artificial versions of a brain. If a person is blind from birth and they never experience conscious light, then what does this tell us? I bring this up because the physicalist will insist that this congenital lack of sight is somehow proof that the visual experience is purely some kind of physical mind process. But the connectist explanation of all this is that it is basically a developmental problem where if particular neurons are not being stimulated, or cannot be stimulated, then the inter-mind connection from the physical mind to the conscious mind might never develop for these neurons. So no conscious light will ever be experienced. However, it is known that sighted people can experience physical sound, PS, as conscious light and physical light as conscious sound, CS. This can happen with certain drugs, and some people just naturally have these sensory cross connections. Maybe congenitally blind people incorporate conscious light into their conscious sound perceptions. They would never know that they are experiencing conscious light because it would be correlated with physical sound events. The upshot of all this is that it is naive to jump to physicalist conclusions when the connectist point of view is equally plausible and explanatory. We know that the world, including our physical minds, is made out of chemicals. We also think that chemicals are not conscious. There is no reason to believe that when chemicals are arranged in a particular way that some kind of magic occurs to enable consciousness in those chemicals. A neuron is a chemical electrical thing that in and of itself is not conscious or alive. It is no more alive than a transistor is alive. A neuron is part of the human machine. Can an LCD display be used by some inter-mind or conscious mind to produce a conscious light scene of what is on the screen? What substance or material besides neurons can be used to connect with an inter-mind? If the physical mind creates consciousness through some physical space process, then we should be able to intercept the conscious light scene that the conscious mind is experiencing and display it on a computer monitor using known concepts from science. If consciousness is not a physical space process, then we will need science to develop new concepts before it can be intercepted and displayed. It might only exist in conscious space. These are the kinds of speculations that the connection perspective enables. You would never be able to imagine anything like this using the physicalist perspective. While dreaming, our whole sense of reality comes from our physical minds and not from the outside world. The conscious mind seems very susceptible to believing alternate realities without questions when certain reality checkpoints in the physical mind are turned off. Weird scenes and situations do not seem unusual. Without external inputs, the physical mind and conscious mind seem pretty dumb when it comes to logical thinking. Maybe the purpose of sleep is to let the conscious mind detach for a while. Sleep is to let the intermind and conscious mind rest, as well as the physical mind. Maybe the conscious mind needs to get away from the physical mind every now and then. That's what dreams are for. That's why we don't remember most of our dreams. Dreams are for the conscious mind, not the physical mind. This is a whole new angle on sleep that could not be realized with the physicalist perspective. Of course, sleep is also necessary for our brains to reorganize the chemicals that were used during the neural activity of the day. Does the shape of the brain say anything about the connection perspective? Interconnecting axons take up the bulk of the space inside the brain, the white matter. The conscious experience part of the brain consists of a thin layer of neurons on the outer surface of the brain, the gray matter. This is, of course, the cortex. All experience seems to be correlated with neural activity in specific areas of the cortex. Maybe it is easier for the intermind to monitor and connect to the brain given that kind of surface configuration. Of course, there are some large folds to the cortex, but it is essentially a surface structure. When you think about all those distinct functional experiential areas that make up the cortex, It just looks like it must be some kind of interface to some next processing stage. But this is just a speculation. The only explanation from brain physiology is that it is a surface on the exterior of the brain in order to promote cooling. But what if there is more to it than that? We can now speculate that at the developmental level, we will have the physical mind developing in physical space and a separate conscious mind developing in conscious space. There is also an intermind which is developing the connections between the physical mind and the conscious mind. The conscious mind is no longer trapped in the physical mind which is in physical space. The conscious mind now has a separate development and existence in conscious space. Maybe an intermind, along with a conscious mind, inhabits and uses a physical mind from conception. The intermind and conscious mind grow as a particular physical mind grows. First there is only one neuron, then there are two, then three, and four, and so on until a fully formed physical mind, intermind, and conscious mind are produced. Note that maybe the intermind will only need to connect with the cortical areas on the surface of the physical mind. With regard to memory, it is thought that it is possible that the recognition of objects and faces comes down to one neuron firing. With this theory, the intermind must know what a particular neuron means when it fires in order to send a feeling of recognition to a conscious mind. On the other hand, if memory has a more distributed configuration among many neurons involving feedback and feed-forward connections, then the intermind will need to interpret the memory using that more complicated activity. Could an intermind attach to a fully formed physical mind and just start using it? Or does an intermind need to grow as a physical mind grows in order to properly use it? I will speculate that there probably is a developmental aspect involved in physical mind, intermind, and conscious mind connections. The act of growing from a single neuron might be absolutely necessary for an intermind and conscious mind to properly connect. The intermind might eventually be in contact with every neuron in the physical mind. Maybe the only way an intermind can be in control of billions of neurons is if, as the physical mind slowly develops, the intermind learns how to use each neuron. It is not known how the intermind learns the meaning of any particular neuron that is firing. The physical mind and the intermind might have built-in mechanisms that facilitate the interconnection process. Maybe individual types of neurons have some sort of chemical signatures that the intermind can read in order to know what conscious experiences to produce. This seems to predict that the intermind must have some innate ability to operate with neurons. We can make some statements about things that are in the conscious mind and things that are in the physical mind. For example, the conscious mind is where the experiences of redness, the standard A tone, and the salty taste are located. The conscious mind is also where the conscious self is located. Examples of things that are located in the physical mind are memory, pattern recognition, eye convergence, tracking, and balance. It is time for science to think more outside the box with regard to consciousness, and hopefully this connection perspective will inspire research in new directions that might someday solve the problem of consciousness.